think one of the points that both Jennifer and Debbie made that I like to use in terms of to start my comments is I think everybody in this room knows what stress is for them, what causes you stress and how you deal with it, right? And as Jennifer said, plants also exhibit stress. Stress to abiotic factors, stress to biological factors, and as Debbie mentioned, it's important in understanding where your landscape, where it fits into the climate that we currently have, and because that causes stress on plants too. Now what's interesting is we live out on West 19th in their old Revere Farms area, and we bought out there when it was asparagus and lettuce fields, and you could see all the way to recenter because there was nothing in between. And it was out in the country. And then in the 31 years that we've been here, Lubbock has grown through it. And so no longer are those asparagus and lettuce fields out there. But what I've come to realize is those of you that live in Tech Terrace, you live in an environment paradise. And the reason you do is you're all protected from the university and all the fences, where those of us outside the loop have much more extreme temperatures because there's not as much buffer as what the landscape. So you have to keep that in mind, that location, 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 as the realtors say, it does play a role in terms of what you can or cannot do. You people in town, inside the loop, have a much better microclimate than those of us outside the loop. And even though it's Lubbock, it's very different. So one of the things we've done over the years is we've kept a garden journal about what's going on different days. I just want to start and read you a couple places in it. And I think you can appreciate it. Because part of what I want to emphasize being climate is how we deal with variability and what is variability. So I'll start that. So let's see. I had one for the report here. So I'm going to start in 2/29/96. Okay, so that's the entry date. Last 2 days have been in the low 20s at night and in the high 30s during the day. The previous 2 weeks were in the 70s and 80s, unseasonably hot, then cold. The winter has been very dry. I've been watering all weekend. Daffodils began blooming around February 21st. They look good. The ones that planted in the front are also up. The daylilies are starting to sprout. So that was the end of November 1990. February 1996. Okay. Yeah. Here's an interesting one. 5/29/2011. We had a windy and extremely dry March through May. We had no rain since last October. Today's temperature is 104. We have watered and tried to keep plants growing. The larkspur look good, and are almost finished though. Crepe myrtles have started to bloom in the backyard. The daylilies are budded and should be in bloom in about a week. We planted 2 mugo pines in the front and 2 spreader Japanese yews under the Bradford pears in the backyard. 7/22/2011. Still no rain. We had 30 days of above 100. The mugos and the yews have all died. Right, okay. And then I want to jump over to the following. You'll appreciate this one. May 1st, 2013. We were having another late season cold front. We were in the low 80s today and now have wind north and a low of 35 tonight. Sounds like last weekend, right? Tomorrow will only be in the low 50s and a cold night and morning for Friday. We dug up plants we planted on the weekend. No rain. We covered the mid-season irises that were starting to bloom. The crepe myrtles were beginning to rebud after the last freeze, and now they're hit again. The larkspurs have started to bloom, and the pincushion columbines look terrific. We have a nice mix of colors. At least we did before this cold weather for early May. So as you can see, having these kinds of extreme temperatures are not necessarily unusual for Lubbock, and to be honest, that's why there are no native trees up in this area, except for that which we have planted, because it is too extreme. Now, one of the things you have to think about, though, is what really does that extreme variability really look like? And I want to leave you with a thought about what is spring? What is spring? So if you look up in Wikipedia or Google, spring is the spring equinox. That's the official day of spring in the northern hemisphere. But for a plant and dealing with stress, or for you in your garden, what we've been looking at actually and trying to understand is there's actually two components of spring that have a major impact for Lubbock and for any region, really. And here's the following. What the Garden Journal has said, and what you can see, and what you can hear over time, is that the date of bud initiation, or when it starts to warm up, has gotten earlier and earlier and earlier in the season. When we first came, our peach trees would bloom toward the end of March. Now they're blooming sometimes in the middle of February, right? So that's the initiation of spring. But the other part of spring is the last average freeze date for Lubbock. The average freeze date is around April the 7th. But when is the historic last freeze date for Lubbock?
After Easter.
It is May the 30th. So we can get freezing temperatures up till May 30th, historically. And as it says here, the May 1st in 2013 went down to 35 degrees that day. And in fact, if you listen to NOAA on the weekend, in 1999, we had a trace of snow on Saturday also in that period. So it's not unusual to have these kinds of cold snaps. But here's what's happening and why gardening in Lubbock is becoming more and more difficult. The winters are warmer, the initiation of spring is earlier, but the variability of when we get the last freeze has not changed. It is still highly variable. So all the plants that initiate now in February may be killed off in April, and they have to reinitiate again. And that's why things that should grow here will not grow here because of them dealing with the variability. You know how you deal with stress, and for a plant, they only have so many ways of coping with temperature, with drought, and with and with wind stress. If they can't max them, if they can't deal with it, they're dead. You go see a doctor, but there's no way to control that for a plant. And so the problem that we have with gardening in Lubbock is this variability, and trying to figure out what will grow given the current abiotic conditions and how those conditions are changing over time. Spring is initiating early, we still have large variability. And that's the challenge, to find plants then that are actually able to do that. We lost this year, for this growing season, we lost more agaves that have been in our yard 5 to 10 years than any other time. And it was a mild winter. They just succumbed. We had no problem with them when we had the 18 inches of snow and the blizzard. They were fine. And the reason is the variability this year was much higher than any other year we've seen them. And as a consequence, they couldn't know whether they had acclimate or not. And as a consequence, when it was warm, they were fine. When it got cold, they froze because they could not deal with that temperature stress. And it's too much up and down. And that's why if you drive around town right now, all of the black pines that were planted 30 years ago are all dying. You walk around campus and they're all going brown. Not the young ones, but the older ones, because they can't deal with the variability and the warm winter temperatures we're seeing. So things that were planted in Lubbock 30, 40 years ago are no longer able to be planted in Lubbock now because of that climate. So for us, it's all about variability. And how do you manage your garden and how do you manage your yard under increasing variability? So that's the challenge. Thank you.